Hey guys, Ryan here from Indy Wrestling School, and we're gonna try something new today. Today is story time. Can I keep it to 3 minutes? Probably not. Hey guys, thanks for joining us here on Indy Wrestling School. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. We put out new videos every single Thursday for 3 Minute Thursday, although today I don't think I'm gonna make the 3 minute deadline, although I rarely do. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is the disaster that was my first ever pro wrestling event. Because maybe that'll inspire you, or maybe you've had a bad show and it kind of turns you off and you don't want to be involved in wrestling for now. But look, everybody has bad shows, and I'm no exception. And to be clear, I've had bad shows since this one, but this one was a real big doozy and very memorable for me because it was my first one. So heading into this show, I wanted to use guys that I admired and looked up to. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford most of them. So I spent the money on the one guy I really wanted to work with, and that was Steve Corino. So I booked Steve Corino, The Patriot, Doink the Clown, Homicide, and Jay Lethal. 5 names. I had a bunch of my friends and some local talent as well. Leading up to the show, maybe 2 days out, found out that Doink the Clown and The Patriot, who I had booked through Dale Gagne, who claimed to be a member of the Gagne family from the AWA. In fact, he ran a promotion that he called the AWA and then was sued by WWE, had taken my deposit money for those guys, or had paid in full, I don't remember. And then magically stopped answering emails and stopped receiving calls. Dale Gagne is a typical crook in the wrestling business. He's about as carny as you can get. That's me shooting. So Dale Gagne took advantage of somebody who was just getting their foot in the door as far as promoting. And of course that shows cowardice, and of course he's a piece of shit for that. But I learned a lesson there. There's not a lot of people you can trust in wrestling. So of my 5 guys, 2 were now missing. I'm down to 3. Leading up to the show, we found out that Jay Lethal had hurt his neck on a TNA show, and it was doubtful that he was going to be able to make it there. Having advertised Jay Lethal and put him on all our posters and all our online media, I just said, hey, can he maybe just come make an appearance? Unfortunately, that was not in the cards. So I was down to 2. And the 2 people I was down to genuinely hated each other, and that's Homicide and Steve Corino. The day of the show, I get there, nervous as you can imagine, but we find out that Homicide is nowhere to be found. We get the number for Homicide from his booking agent, and we're calling him during the show, and he's telling us he's on the Parkway. However, my friend who was actually on the phone with him at this time mentioned that, well, he said he was on the Parkway, but I could hear a crowd behind him. So either way, Homicide had car trouble or whatever the case was and didn't come. I'm down to 1 person. I let Steve Corino know a couple days beforehand that the Patriot wasn't going to be there because this guy Dale Gagne had screwed me out of money, and he recommended Mike Keener. And I ended up using Kid America for the next hundreds of shows that I did. Steve came, he worked our show, and Steve was at the end of his career, quote unquote. The reason I say quote unquote is because he was planning to retire at the end of that year. So he had done our shows and he had so much fun, at least this is what was relayed to me. He had so much fun, he decided to keep going. So we booked him for November, we booked him for December, January. Steve was on every single show until he went to Puerto Rico for a year. So Steve Corino was the only person who showed up to that show, and guess what? The show was amazing. The show worked out great. I mean, there's lots of things I would change about it, knowing what I know now. To have him go out, he treated everybody in the locker room with so much respect. He took the time to work with one of my friends to make sure the main event was as good as it possibly could be. He didn't treat it like just another show. He treated it like it was our biggest show because, quite honestly, it was our biggest show. And for somebody who has as much experience and had as much respect and as much of a following as Steve did, to treat us with that kind of level of respect, I think it speaks a lot to who he is as a person. And I learned that day, probably the most important thing, besides don't get screwed over by Dale Gagne, the most important thing I learned was no matter how big you are in the pro wrestling community, and Steve was definitely one of the big guys there, you're not better than anybody. Everybody deserves to be treated well. Everybody deserves to be treated with respect. And Steve became a close friend after that. I can't speak the amount of respect I have for Steve Corino, and I think if you've seen any of these videos in the past, you know the high thoughts I have for him. So if you're out there and you're thinking about running a wrestling show, you don't need 25 big names. I think you need one good one. I think you need one guy to show you the ropes. I think you need one guy who will treat the industry and the business with respect and treat your company and your guys and your talent with respect. And I think if you have that, I think you'll do all right. And I could say that if Steve wasn't there, that probably would have been one and done for me. So without Steve Corino, I wouldn't be doing these videos. I wouldn't have any experience to share with you other than the one show that failed. So it just takes one person. And I think it just so happened that my first show, I was able to meet Steve and he was able to teach me so much in one day. As a company, we were able to maybe help him find the love for pro wrestling again because he decided after our show that he wasn't going to retire. And as you know, his career went on for another close to 10 years after that. So one show can really make a difference. One show can really change it all. And so I encourage anybody thinking about trying to run a pro wrestling show, do it. You have nothing to lose. And if you're lucky, you have a lot to gain. I don't know how I did with time on that one. I hope it was kind of close to 3 minutes, but that's the story of my first ever pro wrestling show. Obviously, I would do hundreds more after that, but that was the first one, and for me, I'll always have a very clear memory of that day. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. If you like this video, beat the shit out of the like button, and I'll see you guys next Thursday.